Hello and welcome to the latest in the series of Health Tech World Roundtable discussions. My name's Alistair McCall and I'm delighted to be hosting today's discussion on behalf of Health Tech World. And today we're going to focus on AI and life sciences, specifically what's next and what does the future hold. I'm so pleased today that we've got a fabulous group of panelists with us who have generously given up their time and are going to share their insight and experience with us on this fascinating subject. Just a quick reminder before we get started, the entries for the Health Tech World Awards are open, so please have a look at the Health Tech World platform and get your entries in. So without further ado, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, say a little bit about their organisation and their areas of specific interest, and then we'll plunge into what should be a fascinating discussion. If I could start with you, Gil.
It's a pleasure. First of all, Alistair, thank you very much for having me back. And to my colleagues, Andrew and Paul, it's a thrill to meet you across the sea. This will be a great conversation. I'm the chair of Global Health and Purpose at FinPartners. FinPartners is one of the world's largest independent communications organizations. And in my role, I have the privilege of championing innovators who are seeking to improve the human condition.
Great. Thanks very much, Gil. Andrew?
Hello, and yes, thanks very much for the opportunity to be on this webinar. I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm Andrew Davies. I lead on digital health at the Association of British Health Tech Industries. We're a not-for-profit trade association representing health technology companies, so medical devices, diagnostics, and digital health companies. I lead on digital health, and from the AI perspective, really interested in how can we move from the current state where AI is primarily used in pilot test phase and how we can get it into routine clinical use to really support the workforce and patient outcomes.
Great, thank you, Andrew. And Paul?
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Paul White, head of AI at Ants Digital. We're a digital transformation consultancy based up in Leeds, specialising in healthcare and particularly helping the NHS to adopt AI at scale and delivering new genomics services as well.
Great, thanks, Paul. Just to get the discussion going, I'm going to ground the panelists again, starting with Gil, and ask a really simple question. Where can AI make the greatest impact, and where is it making the greatest impact presently?
That's a question I think we're still in some ways, Alistair, seeking to answer. And we've been playing with AI for quite some time. We first called it big data, and then we used the term machine learning, and then finally we came to AI. And AI, the initials mean many things to many people. I use them actually as augmented implementation. I think right now, AI is going to make its biggest impact by taking on roles that we as people actually fulfilled that really don't use our greatest potential. You know, the concept of being able to sort through mammoth amounts of data so that we can do things faster is, I think, the first stage we're trying to get right. And much like for those of you who have transponders in your cars and once used to line up at tolls and throw your coins into a basket and pass on, in a way, machine learning, the transponder, has replaced that function, the toll taker. And it was a very easy transition. AI is helping us make that transition in the life sciences. And I'll just give right now a simple example of that. And obviously, Andrew and Paul will jump in as well. The concept of even, and we haven't gotten there yet, it's so funny, but even in the hospital system, to be able to summarize the electronic medical record and punch out the essential summary for an attending physician or hospital staff of what the patient's condition is, what medications they're on, what were the last steps, what are the next steps. Just doing that on a person who's in and out of hospital would be a huge advantage to our health system. We're not there yet, believe it or not. So right now, we're at the very beginning of being able to apply sensibly AI. And I think we're at the very start of this. I think that my colleagues will be able to add, but I think we're still trying to really figure it out from a very practical stage, but we're getting there.
Thanks, Gil. Andrew?
Yeah, I can agree with everything I think Gil said there. I think the way I would characterize it, though, is going back to my sort of opening remarks. I think its biggest use has got to be in supporting the workforce. We know, certainly in the UK, but every developed health system, there's a workforce issue. There are not enough doctors, nurses, radiologists, whatever it might happen to be, with increasing demographic demand. So I think that overarching issue of supporting the workforce, taking away the routine work that can easily be done through automation and AI, allowing the healthcare professionals to practice at the top of their license, spend time focusing on the patient, and is really where it can have the biggest impact going forward. Right now, where it's having the biggest impact, Gil pulled out the example there of plowing through the electronic health records. I think that's a particular use case. But I think in the near future, or now in the near future, back office is where it's going to have its biggest impact in the automation of discharge processes, note writing, interrogating EHR. I think the clinical application, while in use now, to really have its full impact will come a bit later because of the higher risk element of implementing it in that sort of use case.
Thanks, Andrew. And Paul, your perspective?
I agree with what Jill and Andrew said there. To sort of flip the question, I think at the moment where we're seeing its biggest impact and biggest investment is in computer vision and medical imaging. The AI is really good at spot the difference and helping to diagnose early stage cancer, hairline fractures, bleeds on brains from scans and radiology departments, and it's a great decision support tool to clinicians at the moment. I think we're seeing an increasing number of trials complete successfully and clinical rollouts start to scale in the NHS. And where we could see its biggest impact in the future, so Jill touched on sort of big data, and AI is great at sitting on top of large data sets, and I think its power in personalized medicine could be amazing. So how it could sift through sequence genomes and help spot variants at a faster rate, and how we can take that right down into data coming from wearables and eventually linking these data sets together in a truly multimodal approach. It could be really powerful for more personalized medicine in the future.
Thanks, Paul. Gil, that's something that I recall we spoke about on a different round table, this question of personalization and AI playing a role in individuals having access to more information and practicing more self-care. I mean, is that a key theme in this, as well as early diagnostics, moving towards a position where AI allows individuals to take more responsibility for their own healthcare?
Alistair, that's a really wonderful question, because the ability for people to plug in questions into an open AI system gives them great access to information they never imagined possible. But there's a challenge, and I think Andrew can speak to this as well. There's a challenge between the information that is in the world and they're accessing. And there's something called hallucinations, and hallucinations are, in fact, information that's not fully correct. It could be inaccurate, as a matter of fact. And so the ability to draw information out of the system actually requires us to have knowledge. So AI is not in place of knowledge. And so for the consumer to say, I have high cholesterol, I have high blood pressure, I have a high A1C, high blood sugar, am I at risk for X, Y, and Z? The information they get back is actually reflection or shadow of the accuracy of the information that's in the system. And so the answer to your question, the quick answer is yes. it can help them develop a personal care sort of trajectory. Flip side is they have to have the knowledge to determine whether the information they've received, the plan they've received, is accurate or not. And that's going to be a challenge. I do think, going back to the sense of AI and life sciences and what Paul shared, something very, very important. We want to invent, we want to discover and develop drugs faster than ever before. What AI can do from a personal standpoint is actually tell someone whether they would qualify for a clinical trial or not by putting in their data early, by putting in the clinical trial information, the requirements. The consumer could actually be able to discern, sort through, am I right for this trial? Is there another trial? I think there AI can have a very practical purpose on the individual's life trajectory. But again, I think that we're still collecting data. We're still trying to figure out what data are accurate and what data are hypotheses we're going to draw off of. So I think, Alistair, the answer is qualified yes and no.
That's clear, Gil. But just opening, Gil's opened up that conversation there, so feel free to sort of come in, Andrew or Paul.
Yeah, can I pick up on the bit Gil was talking about hallucinations, which obviously, we all know is a thing with the large language models, etc. I think it's probably need to be clear that we are quite some way from using large language models, certainly in a clinical setting in health systems. So it's a future problem, it's a future issue that we need to be aware of, but it's right now, a large language model is not going to get through any sort of regulatory clearance for clinical use. And at the rate they are improving, by the time they do, it might be less of an issue. I was fortunate enough to listen to a lecture from Eric Topol. It's a little while ago now, maybe 12 months ago, but he was saying that 2 years prior, he wouldn't have listened to a large language model in terms of any clinical support, clinical diagnosis. 2 years later, or I think it was even less than that, they had progressed so far that it would be his first go-to as a patient, if he wanted to try and diagnose something in himself. So they are moving really rapidly. Where it's going to go, we've just had the latest release of ChatGPT, which kind of started all this in a way. I know Gil was saying 20 years ago we were looking at AI as probably before that even, but in the public consciousness, certainly, it was November 23 when ChatGPT launched to the public that it really hit awareness. So they're going to move quickly. I think the other thing I'd like to pick up on, certainly around personalized medicine, is there's the AI, and that's what we're here to talk about today. But I think it's the power of AI combined with other things. There's the amount of data we are collecting, both within the clinical sphere, but also outside of the clinical sphere, the housing, the environment, all those determinants of health, along with new sort of science around genomics, digital therapeutics, these sorts of things. And it's when you combine AI, the amount of data, these new interventions that we have, that it becomes really powerful.
Yeah, I think just to pick up on that point, that's where I was going to go with it as well, that we're probably a little way off asking ChatGPT as sort of a route into personalized medicine, but the impact it could have on a patient's sort of connection with their medical journey, that they're put on the right treatment plan from the start, or that they've been on the wrong one, and using AI sat across these data sets like it's like we've never sort of pulled together before to put someone on that right plan, and they start seeing the impact that has on their health in a positive way. I think that could form a really strong connection between the patient and personalized medicine.
I think, Paul, that what you've just said is important. The reality is, when we think of who controls the medical system, it's the person with the stethoscope around their neck. In terms of the clinic itself, I think who controls the medical system are the person who controls the purse strings. Unfortunately, that's really what drives medical care, the economics of care. And I think NHS is seeing that quite clearly, that it is an incredible system that's underfunded, under-resourced, and that goes down to the technologies that are used. But when we think of what Alistair asked us and what Andrew was talking about, which is, what is the role, what is the ultimate role of the health system? It is to improve people's well-being, their to sustain their lives in a positive way. Part of that, which Alistair asked earlier, was the role of the consumer in this. By the way, we're always people, sometimes patients, and I think we forget that patience is this thing. The concept of a patient being able to have access to their electronic medical record, which they do have in theory, and then understand what the doctor is scribbling in there or typing in there, and being able to put that into a large language model and say, speak to me and make me understand exactly where I am and what's my next step, I think is a critical part of bringing the system closer to the consumer and bringing the consumer into the conversation with their health providers. That should be a given, I think, already. Challenge, as my friend John Nost often says, we're in the cognitive age. And I think that we talk about AI as this magic wand. It really is reliant on a few things. One, the psychological well-being of the health professional to want to use the power of information process quickly and sort of match their own assumptions next to the data's recommendations. That takes a lot of courage. So I'll give an example to all of us, which is how many surgeons are comfortable with robotic surgery? How many surgeons say, robotic surgery, forget about it. The way to get it done is to cut the person open up, take a look, get the job done, finish it up. And yeah, they'll have a zipper in their front, but I'll know it's done correctly. That's a skill set and a willingness to push yourself or the clinician to push themselves forward. Same with AI. AI is applicable to everybody who has to make a diagnosis. There's a lot of data in the system, but they have to be willing to push themselves and realize, and this is horrible. How many doctors do you say, I was wrong? I actually would say, run around. I don't think you'll find on one hand a lot of doctors who will say, I was absolutely wrong on that diagnosis. But it happens every moment. And I think AI is a very good way for clinicians to say, I'm conducting a peer review session right now with my computer. So I think AI has a very practical, life-sustaining role to play today in the hands of someone who's cognitively sophisticated to acknowledge they might be wrong.
Yeah, I really like that point earlier on of using AI to sort of bridge the gap between clinician and patient. And I think whilst I might be concerned about a patient using ChatGPT for that, I think there needs to be recognition that they almost certainly will do. And so how do we get ahead of that and maybe drive from industry or from the center a safer adoption, pointing them to a model that's been trained explicitly to answer certain types of questions, or one that will refuse to answer a certain question if it knows it really shouldn't be doing so. But I think that's a really good point of how it could be.
Yeah, and I think that that bit about patients using ChatGPT, of course they're going to, before ChatGPT, we were all Googling medical questions before going in to see your doctor. It's just the next step on it's going to happen, and the doctors, will have to, accommodate that. I think the other part of that equation, and a bit back to personalization, but certainly, Gil's sort of provocation around patients owning that health record, etc., is the increasing use of fitness and well-being wearables, and where does the data from that fit into the picture, and how is that incorporated into the professional record, shall we say? It's a rich source of data, but it's very much real world data. It's not necessarily a gold standard measurement in any given circumstance, but it can paint a good picture of trends and what happens in the particular use cases in that real world. I think incorporating those data feeds could be extremely powerful, but also extremely difficult.
Yeah, I think when we were first looking at sort of wearables, like 8 years ago, before AI could have an impact, I think the sort of clinician view is we don't want that noise in the record. That's a lot of noise. How can I trust that Paul did go for the walk that his watch is saying that he did? And I've been on calls just this week with some academic institutions who are looking at using wearables to track depression, and where AI could play a part now in removing the noise from a record is it can spot the trend, like you said, like, oh, actually Paul's on a bit of a downward slope, and it could send a summary rather than it spamming the record. Maybe now it's summarizing it and sending just the pertinent information that might kickstart more prevention like treatment rather than reactive when I end up in a worse state.
Could I pick up on something Gil raised and ask a question of my fellow panelists here? So Gil, you say doctors don't admit they made a mistake, which I've kind of seen instances of that myself. Do you also think, is AI being held to a higher standard than doctors? So when an AI hallucinates and makes a mistake, it's a disaster, it can't happen. Doctors make mistakes. We are all human.
That's a great question. I mean, Andrew, that's just like a very great question. I'm going to say yes. I think that it is being held to a higher standard than human, and I think it's because data in the science field. I think we look at data and we say data. There's a purity to data in theory, like mathematics. I mean, one person's opinion. There's a lot of medicines that we've done massive outcomes trials on, and only later do we see, when there are millions and millions of people using that medicine, do we suddenly see a signal that we didn't see earlier on in the journey. The signal, how do we spot the signal? Well, it's through data. Ultimately, we start to look at data that we're examining, that we're putting through the machine, so to speak, and we suddenly realize, gee, this drug is doing X, but we never realize it's also associated with negative Y. And so I think that we have to understand that we're looking for absolutes. I think the human mind desperately needs heroes and villains. And we see right now AI could be the panacea for all of our imperfections. And then we're going to find out that AI also has imperfections. So I think we're shocked because we've leaned on the system. And, I think this is a question of, let's say, radiology. The radiology felt very threatened by AI. And I think Paul talked about this earlier about, diagnostics. But when we think about AI being able to look at scans and really discern a fine point toward a diagnosis, then it's marvelous. And it doesn't diminish the radiologist's ability to sort of like be in partnership with the information. It doesn't at all. What it does do is spare that radiologist from having to remember every single minute situation that might be. For many years ago, just as an example, I worked with the Australian government, and I worked in health and immigration and family reunification. We'd see a spot on an X-ray on someone's lung. Well, in the 1980s, if you saw a spot on an X-ray, you made an assumption of perhaps it's tuberculosis, and you rejected the application potentially. But years later, they realized maybe it's just a spot. We should actually do another exam and see what is it. And so that's something that AI, unfortunately, at this moment is not skilled at. And I think, Andrew, this brings down sort of the heart of the question, which is empathy. I don't think AI at this point is programmed to consider our feelings, empathy, the what ifs. If we're not right, I think humanity. I always say over machine, humanity will win, so long as we maintain our empathy for each other and our caring for what the purpose of healing is. Then I think we'll have a balanced expectation of AI. But I think your question is intriguing. I think it's a question we have to ask ourselves every day now as we type in our prompts. You know, what happens if it's not right? Will I forgive AI?
I think my view on that high bar of assessment of AI is probably down to a lack of understanding about what AI is doing, and its ability to explain its decisions to you. I mean, a lot of the IP of a model is wrapped up in that, so it's not very visible to us because that's the IP of the vendors. And so it's called like a black box problem. And when we don't understand it, how can we trust it? And I think that's why we're setting these high bars for it to pass. I know there's a little fallacy in there that previously what we relied on is the medical education that all the clinicians went through. And you could easily argue, well, was that the same education across every university in the country? And each clinician then having different experiences in their career. But for AI, it's new. We don't understand it. And I think that's where the high bar is coming from.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I'm surprised we got this far actually into this discussion without the word trust being mentioned. I think, it's a lack of ability to explain itself does raise trust issues, both with the clinician and with patients it's being used in conjunction with.
You know, something that I think the title of our conversation really speaks to is where I think I'd have great confidence in AI to assist us. One, in terms of looking at the history of science around certain molecules, in terms of drug discovery, drug development, I think that AI really is fundamental. Now, we're trying sometimes to process countless scores, if not more, of molecules and their effect on an organic system. I think AI, the speed of AI to process information, that could be instrumental in saving lives in the future. And I think that every good scientist has probably become also an expert prompt engineer. That's a question of honing sort of the landscape from being like infinite to finite. AI has a huge role there. The other aspect is you have a database. Let's say there are companies like Stuff That Works that was created by a former Waze person. They have like 3 million patients in their database with chronic conditions. Being able to sort through those 3 million people and determine who might be right for what clinical trial and why, I think AI could do a great job there. I think an AI could do a great job scraping data off of medical records and saying you missed these billing codes, or you missed this follow-up exam. This person was supposed to come back 3 months later for this test. Send out a prompt to them through the system and just say, hello, Mrs. Smith, we saw you 3 months ago and we're waiting for this exam. Those are assists that AI could give us right now. And I don't think that those are being deployed in their practical implementation mode to accelerate access to care. That's one aspect of this. The other aspect is actually what we're using AI for right now is putting the text of medical journals, peer review articles into the system to look for anomalies in what has been accepted science. Now that's frightening, I think, for people who have written papers in good intent. I'm not talking about fudging data, heaven forbid, but for looking at actually anomalies in the data that we didn't realize. And so I think AI has a very practical role in our lives today. But I'm going to raise a question. Andrew, you may have the answer for this in a blink. But I often ask doctors, how much training do you have on health technologies? Now, when you're in medical school, do you have a full course? Do you have 2 courses? do you have a course on AI? And the vast majority look at me with like blank expressions, say, a course in health technologies or digital health? No, maybe I got a few hours of training, and I'm talking about newly minted physicians. So how do we expect this to work really well when the people who have to use it really well are left to their own journey? I mean, Andrew, you and Paul should be professors at medical schools teaching doctors to be how to use the technologies to their fullest benefit or our benefit. So I think there's a disconnect. And I think, Andrew, the question you asked, do we hold AI to a higher standard? Yes, because we don't hold ourselves up to a high enough standard.
Yeah, no, I mean, the medical training is about medical. It's not about technology, and the learning about technology comes on the job. Basically, you pick it up from the consultant, and as you move through your career. I mean, you mentioned robotic surgery earlier. That is learned on the job, and that's actually an issue because it's a barrier to actually spreading that technology, because it's a very narrow funnel at consultant level. The junior docs are not coming through with the knowledge of using robotic surgery. So certainly, something we're working on right now with the NHS, and Royal Colleges, etc. How can we expand that training? And you got to think it goes beyond the docs as well. It's the whole surgical team in that case. But with AI, the cohort of people who need to understand what's going on is much wider. Certainly, the NHS, has put a lot of emphasis on basic digital skills within the workforce, but not specifically AI at any sort of scale.
I think the intent of NHS is magnificent. Actually, despite its shortcomings, particularly now where people talk about some of the struggles of NHS, I think it's one of the great medical systems of the world. Its intent is good. The system may not be working optimally, but there's so much conversation among the people who could make a difference in getting it right. It gives me a tremendous amount of hope. I'm speaking to you from across, obviously, the world, and the United States is one of the world's largest nations. It's a prosperous nation, and yet we have a very dysfunctional health system. And we have about 40% of our population has insurance that's provided by way of their employer. They lose their employment. They often lose their insurance. Another 40+% is on the open market. And then you have what we'll call government pay, Medicare and Medicaid. And all of these tiers of payment and so forth. If you have Medicaid, which means sort of government assisted, low income insurance, you really have just basic survival care. And so we have a very dysfunctional, fragmented system. NHS was designed to create some sense of health equity within the system. Now, whether it exists or not is a question we could have a lifetime conversation around. But the intent, the design of NHS is great. I sometimes feel that NHS will figure out how to best deploy AI before the United States, because each hospital system in the United States is its own universe and is designing, in many cases, its own AI system. So, we have so much fragmentation here. And so it's hard for a patient who goes from one major medical center, I won't mention any names, to another major medical center, and they can't even transfer their data effectively. They have to get permission from one system to move the data to another system. Well, how do the doctors communicate around these data? It's near impossible. So I always say, what the great thing about our medical system is? If you see a doctor, let's say I see Dr. Davies, and I'm asked to fill out a form about my health condition, I can reinvent my whole health history. Right. And then I see Dr. Y, and I can give him a totally different story. And Dr. Y is working off of a different set of data. NHS will harmonize data. I think we're well behind you in the United States right now. And that's a problem in terms of good care.
I'd love to say that we'd solve that, but I was going to say I'd love to say that we had solved that problem in the NHS, but there is still big integration problems across regions of the NHS and data sharing that has been trying to be tackled for the last 10 years. There's been some really good national programs that have solved parts of that, but we're by no means perfect yet.
Yeah, I think we could probably go down a huge rabbit hole talking about that sort of topic. But
Yeah.
to link that perhaps back to what you were saying, Gil, about using AI for cohort identification for clinical trials, I think take that a bit wider. The second biggest use case for AI, certainly on the latest data, which is a couple of years old, and things are moving fast, but on that data, the first was diagnostics, the sort of thing Paul's talked about with AI and medical imaging, that sort of thing. The second was population health management. It's about using AI to identify those cohorts that are at risk. And that's very much about this health equity, making sure everyone is getting the right care, moving towards that well-being state. And that's I think can be one of the big applications. But again, while we've got the NHS, these are still projects that have been run at a local basis, which is probably quite right, because that's where the data is, where the context of the data is, and where they can manage the right interventions based on the data.
Yeah. To your point, Andrew, where I think I have great hope of AI helping all of us is in dealing with health inequities. We have to step back, and there are people who really fall between the cracks, unfortunately, in the health system, and they don't get the care they need. Either they're living in a certain area of London that is underserved, or another place in the United Kingdom that's underserved, or the United States that's underserved. They may not have the best care team around them. The sense of looking at AI will allow us to look at anomalies in terms of the quality of care we're providing people. Everybody, when we think of the miracle of health innovation around the world, and some of the things that are being developed truly are miracles in a sense, or they're technological miracles in that sense. We never dreamt we would get this far so soon. But people are entitled to live healthier, longer lives, and it really shouldn't be determined by their zip code, as we say in this country, the area they live in, the region they live in. That the fact that we have regions in our country where the life expectancy can differ by as much as 20 years. Think about that. It's incredible. It's incredible. And we use AI now to sort through these data. The next step, actually, I think, is to use AI as a policy tool. So often we're saying life and death decisions on diagnosis, as Paul pointed out. I would say justice. I would say at the very least we could use AI right now to look at injustice and right that as quickly as possible from a policy standpoint, which I think all of us would welcome.
Gil, that's a great prompt for a question I was considering there, which is how do we get the most out of AI when we're addressing governments, research institutions, the health industry more generally? Where should they be prioritizing or deprioritizing to make sure that we extract the benefits of AI as promptly as possible?
Well, that's what goes back to what I said before, augmented implementation. I think at the very least, we have mountains and mountains, mountain ranges of data. I think that when we take all these electronic medical records, first of all, we can take a look and see where medicines are working best and where they're not. We could see where medicines that are not indicated for particular uses are actually providing hidden benefits we never meant possible, and look at the application. I think the government of India, for instance, which, here you have a nation of 1.4 billion people, 400 million people are middle class. That blows my mind. A nation of 400 million people who are middle class and higher in terms of economic status. Obviously, we're talking about, therefore, 600 million people who are below the income line, but still, they've made a decision to accept drug approvals from the United Kingdom, from Europe and the United States for cancer and rare diseases without doing clinical trials in India on the strength or belief of the data, and obviously using AI to examine this as well. So that's a practical application of accelerating people's access to a medication and not saying, well, we need to do clinical trials here in India for this cancer drug. I know that they say it will improve survival of lung cancer in the United Kingdom, but I need to do my own trials. AI is serving a role right there. That's practical too. How many times has each of us, our listeners today, how many times has AI or doctor written down and say, come back please in 6 months, conduct these tests. Let's take a look and see how this number on your bloods is going up or down. And you don't do it. AI could be programmed to look at that and actually do a robotic call in a human language, like a large language model, and just say, Alistair, it's time for your such and such exam. A prescription for that test has been sent to your provider at such and such an address. We don't need a human being to do that. That human being could be deployed elsewhere to help you. So AI can really augment implementation to make people better. That's a given. The other aspect that I think we have to look at is billing in this country, the United States. We rely on a doctor to write down billing codes after a visit. That's not a good use of a physician's time. Let the machine do that for us. So that's today. And then, of course, I think Andrew and Paul talked a lot about clinical trials. We could sort through really early through the examples we have of prior trials and people participating in trials. We could actually sort through and say, hey, here's a wider range of candidates. But I think that Andrew and Paul, and I'd be curious for their points of view. I think during COVID, we got very innovative. We're going to be speaking to each other as we are across the world on a platform. Like we could speak to our doctors. Now doctors want you to come back in. They get a higher billing code here for that. You've got to wait in a waiting room for an hour at times for a doctor. I'm sure it's the same way in the UK. We have all these data that are collected from our wearables. Nothing is really done with it. It's not hooked up. We're not even asked permission. When you visit a doctor, the doctor doesn't say, would you be open to linking me to your watch? That doesn't happen. So we've gone back to the pre-COVID era. We've reset the button. AI actually could have helped us advance into this peri-COVID period much better. So on one hand, practical. On the other hand, opportunity lost.
Any thoughts, Andrew or Paul? That question was, how do we get the most out of it? Governments, research, institutions, health authorities.
Yeah. So I've got a couple of points I think to split those sort of institutions apart. So for research and healthcare, and sort of riffing off clinical trials, how are we working with our healthcare leaders to make sure that those trials are targeting problems that they're trying to solve? So things that will stand a chance post trial into being accelerated into the front line and have a meaningful impact. Especially in a world in AI at the moment where there is a lack of funding, like we're competing against other problem solvers, like hiring another radiologist or buying a new scanner. Like why would they invest in AI? And so how do the trials tackle those problems? And how does the government enable that? So new government, we're looking at where they're going to put funding. how can they fund the NHS having flexibility over these trials across multiple models, and particularly when we were talking about education earlier, I'd also bring in incubation. So how do we incubate the models coming out of academia, and help give them the scale to bring that to the front line?
Yeah, don't disagree with any of that. Just take a sort of slightly different view on it. I'd like to come back to trust. To get the most out of it, we need the trust from the patients, from the healthcare professionals. On the healthcare professional side, trust it's going to give me the right answer, or I can understand where that answer has come from. Trust that it's not going to take my job. From the patient point of view, trust that, the answer is right. Also trust that it's not going to take the option away from that human interaction. And I think some of that is down to the wider perceptions of AI, because we're not in a little medical bubble here. Everyone's talking about AI broadly in society. So we got to look at what perceptions are more broadly out there, but particularly within sort of the medical environment. I really see regulation as a key part of supporting that trust, not as a barrier to innovation, but a way we can support innovation into the market. But getting that regulatory framework right, because regulating AI is going to be very different to regulating a hip implant. We need to adapt the processes that we currently have, more focus on post-market surveillance, greater use of sandboxes and these sorts of tools. If we get the regulation right, that will engender trust with healthcare professionals who should understand that. That then should engender trust because they can talk knowledgeably about it to their patients.
Thanks, Andrew.
I get frightened though, Andrew, on the trust issue. We're definitely in a period of great misinformation, and which I differentiate from disinformation, which is the intentional telling of a lie again and again and again. To appeal to a certain population. That's you see that a lot in dictatorships, of course, disinformation, but this is unintentional. And you use that word trust, which I think is really at the crux of this, which is my anxiety around technology being used for good, my good, your good, the world's good. And I think that when we're uncertain about something, we're either slow to embrace or resistant to change. But I go back to I don't know. I have a hybrid vehicle. You might have something that's more organic, like a carriage and a horse. But once upon a time, of course, we traveled in carriage and the horses, and then somebody invented the horseless carriage. And we started to travel in these horseless carriages. Well, I think of all the blacksmiths who probably saw that and said, oh my goodness, this is going to drive me out of business. I make a living, shoeing horses and fixing carriages. What am I going to do? And they became obviously mechanics at a higher range. They had to have a higher level of skills. I think we have to understand that whenever we've had technology that has displaced people from a job, and these people are thoughtful people, the technology doesn't eliminate jobs often. It creates a new sphere of jobs that are available. And so what I'm concerned about is, to your point, and I love what you said about the role of policy and government. You're spot on. I think we have to take a look and just say, what's going to be the training application for people as they move on, like secretaries who are typing notes or looking through typing notes that go into the EMR. What's going to be their role when the room is going to be? Why the doctor will say, Paul, do you mind if I record our session? We're using the recording. It will go right into your electronic medical record, and a large language model is putting it into good common sense language in the EMR. What's going to happen to all the pool of typists or inputters? They'll be deployed elsewhere in the system, but we're not articulating that as a vision. And I think, Andrew, you're so right to rally the people that you bring together. to start to express like where we're going to go with this. The people, we've had technology since we invented fire and smelting. That's technology at the basis. We don't say, oh my goodness, I used to bang metal for 3 months to get this sword. Now I can heat it up and mold it.
Yeah. The where we're going to go with this, I think, really plays into what Andrew's saying about surveillance as well, which is such an interesting space in AI right now of how has it performed? Has it met expectations? And from that, what should we be investing in? What's worked? What hasn't? There's a lot of hype around AI, and that surveillance is really going to help drive that future, and that investment is both into healthcare industries, into what we should be doing research in. So yeah, it's a critical space right now as we start ramping up deployments.
Thanks, Paul. That's quite an apposite note in which to sort of draw the discussion towards a conclusion. We've covered a lot of ground, but I think it would be interesting to hear from each of our panelists about their hopes for the future with reference to AI and life sciences and what it means to people, to governments, to all of us. I'll maybe start with Paul, then Andrew, then Gil, and just a few words and your final thoughts and hopes for the future with reference to AI and the impact it will have in the future. Paul.
Yes, I think there's great potential for AI. It's not going to go anywhere, and it really can revolutionize healthcare. So what I want to see is how we use the resources that we've got and the infrastructure that we've got. So off the back of Lord Darcy's report, it's a aging and underfunded sector. How do we use what we have to deliver now and enable us for the future? Not have short-term views, quick wins, quick headlines, but how we're going to achieve strategic ambitions and keep the NHS at the forefront of the innovation that's to come.
Thanks, Paul. Andrew, final thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, there's AI enthusiasts and AI skeptics. Probably all three of us are in the enthusiastic bucket, or we wouldn't be on this call. So yeah, I really do think it has great potential across society, but certainly in health, which is health is so important. It's one of the fundamentals, isn't it? Health, and we see that. We just had an election here in the UK. The number one issue that people were voting on was the health system. So it's fundamental to people. So we've got to look at how AI can really support that health service. I think one of the things for me is we've got to keep in mind, AI is not its own entity. AI is designed, developed by people, it's deployed by people, it's managed by people. We are in control of this. So far, at least. We'll see what the long-term future brings. But right now, we are in control. And I think we've got to use that control wisely to really focus in on key use cases and take into account also the impacts of AI, potential negative impacts, be that on people's jobs, be it on the environment, and the huge, compute and power needs of training large language models, etc. And we've got to manage this so it is, very much AI for good, to use a well-known phrase. If we do that correctly, we can really, liberate people and liberate productivity within our health systems and within our society.
Thanks, Andy. And Gil, you get the final word.
Well, first of all, I think that what Paul and Andrew have shared is spot on. There's no right answer here. I think it's a composite answer, and I think that their counsel to all of us is well taken. What I always find is the system, the health system, is its own customer, and we often say, why are we doing this? And then we throw in platitudes. We're doing this for the sake of the patient. But I think we have to get very real with ourselves and understand that the patient is sort of an afterthought. If you really look at this, and for my friends in the UK, I used to watch, Yes, Minister. Very, very close to that. I don't know if anybody remembers the show, but there's an episode where the minister visits a hospital, and he's very impressed with the hospital. It's quiet, it's clean. And then he looks around and he says, something's missing. He says, I can't put my finger on it. And he realizes there are no patients in this hospital. And of course, his aide says, yes, Minister. He says, how many people work here? He says, oh, about 400, Minister. And he explains why. The challenge is that we leave the patient out the doors. They're not in the system. They're outside the system. My hope is we start to use information in a way that brings the patient closer to the center of the system, because the core of the system, the customer of the system right now, is the system itself. If you are, to Paul's point, a radiologist, who does the system revolve around? Radiology. And if you're a gastroenterologist, who does the world revolve around? The gastroenterologist, and so forth. And so what we have to begin to appreciate is we have to find a way to integrate the system around what we're trying to do. We're trying to improve people's lives. We're trying to improve outcomes. And so when we look at that, I think information can give us that acuity that we often lack. That's on one hand, a sense of greater awareness that the center of our efforts, not necessarily the customer, but the center of our efforts revolves around the consumer, the patient. That's one. Two, I think we have to understand that we have a highly understaffed health system. We talk about this frequently. We need more human capital deployed to the problems of health. And that means epidemiologists, it means skilled health providers, it means home health workers, it means obviously good nursing staff, skilled physicians, all of that. AI could free us up tomorrow if we could figure out ourselves to deploy these people in ways that they can make a greater difference in people's lives. So I think there's a two-pronged approach to the use of AI. One is, well, the effectiveness of the system, accelerating access to care. And the other aspect is just reducing the administrative burden on health professionals so that they have more time, in theory, spending with patients who are in the waiting room and less time sort of mapping out notes that could have been done by a machine. And if we can improve access to care, I think this is a worthy pursuit of Paul's consult with companies and Andrew's rallying the system, and in terms of thinking through how do we implement this effectively.
On behalf of Health Tech World, thank you, Gil. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you to Paul. You've been a fabulous panel, and thank you for bringing a complex subject to life. It's been a most illuminating discussion. We covered a lot of ground, and I'm sure we'll come back to some of these themes. Thank you to everybody that's watched. Please share this as widely as possible. It's a discussion that should be seen and heard and engaged with by as many people as possible. So thanks once again. Please get your entries in for the Health Tech World Awards if you haven't done so already, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again, Gil, Andrew, and Paul.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alistair. Thank you very much, Andrew and Paul. Thank you. Wonderful meeting you.